Thank you, everyone. Now, imagine, if you will, we're in a time machine and we've landed in the year 2030. The three panelists here are here to tell you, I told you so. I knew this would happen. What we're going to do is we're going to go around the panel. They're each going to give a prediction. And then you in the audience are going to say whether you agree or disagree. Okay? It's going to be fun. So we have Phil Rowley, Head of Futures, Omnicom Media Group, Rachel Powney, VP Marketing Communications at Unruly, and at the end, Claire Gleeson-Landry, Head of Investment and Sustainable Media at Goodloop. So let's go in order. Phil, I'm going to pick on you first because you're sitting right there.
What's my prediction?
What's your prediction? You imagine in 2030 and what's happening now that you predicted the whole time?
Okay, so I think the thing that nobody's talking about, and I'm guessing that you've spoken a lot about the metaverse and sustainability, and I'm sure that we'll mention that again. The thing that nobody is talking about, which we're predicting, is something called the demographic disruption. And that effectively is a shake-up in the makeup of the, I suppose, the global constituent parts of society. What's going to happen is, ultimately, we are going to see more grandparents than grandchildren in the world. We are seeing an increasingly burgeoning cohort of older people, to the point where, the replacement rate, the birth rates in this country are currently 1.58. That's below replacement level. And we have issues with depopulation. Elon Musk, when he's not tweeting about Twitter and how annoyed he is, he's tweeting about depopulation. What does that mean for advertisers and media and business? Well, we have been obsessed for years with getting young people into our agencies to tell the old people how to use TikTok. Well, unfortunately, that's not going to cut it much longer. We're going to have a much better representation of older people within our industry, because the demographic breakdown of our country, and I'm talking about all Western nations as well, will be far more stuffed with old people that just simply won't die. And that means that we're going to have to learn to talk the language of middle-aged people as they just stay around for longer, be culturally active longer, be financially active and politically active longer. And that's the thing when we talk about the metaverse and sustainability, as important as they all are, that we're missing. And that's the thing that will bite us in the arse if we don't look at sort of preparing for that in the next decade.
Annoying people who won't die.
That was somebody over the age of 50 that said that, I think. Hey!
Before I bring in the rest of the panel on this, I mean, very interesting what you're saying. Are you presuming that behaviours don't change over time? I mean, isn't there a life cycle to things? That you mentioned, young people teaching the old people how to use TikTok. I wonder if we'll actually be talking about TikTok that much in 5 years, because young people are always looking for the next big thing to move on to. Don't things change quite a lot? So I hear what you're saying about the older demographic getting older, but
Well, I think things change because I think young media behaviour amongst young people is perhaps more transient and perhaps more faddish, and I think they're much more reactive to the kind of media that's coming along. But if you take a look at ITV3 and you're watching Midsummer Murders, the ITV... Oh God, is Carolyn McCall still in this room? I have to be really careful.
No, she ran off when she saw
ran
you.
off, right. The schedule of ITV3 still remains, Midsummer Murders, Poirot, and ITV4 is The Professionals, and has been for 20 years. I think you get to a certain point and you lock in those preferences and you don't really shift them anymore. And I think that's the difference between young people, abandoning Instagram for TikTok and then abandoning TikTok for Be Real. At some stage, they will reach the age, and I've heard 30 age be called the age of confidence before, where you go, right, this is me now, these are my preferences, these are my tastes. That period I spent in my youth was me working out what I liked. Now I know what I like, that's me, I'm stuck with it. And so I agree that there will be a kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, a small evolution. Older people are the fastest growing penetration users of smartphones as they come to the game very, very slowly, so their behaviours augment and adapt. But I don't think fundamentally their preferences are really up for the amount of change that young people are.
Okay. So many questions.
Was that the wrong answer?
I've so many questions. I'm just trying to think about how to unpack that. I'm just going to ask the panel what they think. Rachel, the very name Unruly is about not playing by the rules, or tell me different where the name comes from. But in terms of what Phil was just saying about young people versus older people, do you think we focus on young people too much, and that's something that's really going to be different in 7 or 8 years' time, that the penny drops and we get a bit more woke to what the older people think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that, I think we do have to pay a lot of attention to younger people because they're going to be the buyers of the future for us. And I think brands have, quite rightly so, are looking at behaviours. And to the point you're making, I don't think actually it's interesting, have behaviours changed that much from young to old? Because if you think about how, if I think about how I spent my time and people, my friends spent their time when we were younger, it was, we were on computer games, not for as long as they are now, but there's more choice now. So people will spend more time on computer games than what they did back in the 80s and 90s, but that's what we still did. Sport's still a big part of kids' lives as it is today, but now it's more on digital, on phones and on TV, just because there's just more choice there. But I do think as well, brands are starting to think a lot more about the older generation as well as they become a lot more focused on where they're spending their time and using their income and whereabouts they want to put their purchases towards and things. So I think it's a balance really. I think, you have to look at both really.
Before I bring in Claire, let's have a quick show of hands. How many people think that we kind of focus too much on young people in advertising and media? How many people think we don't focus enough on young people? No. Interesting.
There's one
there. Very interesting. Claire, what do you think?
I'm 40 next month. I really don't know which category I fall into anymore. I feel very young and I behave really young quite often, and I definitely date younger people than me. But so I always, guys,
no ads here, no ads.
It's not Tinder. I think it's always been the case, hasn't it? If we can't write off people in their 60s, they lived through punk. We can't write off people who are in their 50s, they lived through rave. Can't write me off because I lived through the 90s, and let's face it, that's come back. I think demographics have always been about attitudes as well. I think we coalesce around a set of values as individuals, and things like the metaverse help you find those tribes, as it were, those communities and those groups. So it'll be really, really interesting. The fundamental problem is, though, young people coming up now, they don't have that much disposable income. So when we think about them as future consumers, what have they got? They've got a huge amount of debt if they choose to go to university. It's impossible to buy a house, so are they going to be buying furniture and white goods and things like that? So I think, I sound really loud in here, this is a very loud mic. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years. By 2030, I'd like to think things will have simmered down and there'll be less sort of pointing across the divide of generations as well, because of those attitudes, there are so many unifying things that are happening right now that we're all in together. The climate crisis, the cost of living crisis, everyone's affected in different ways. And so hopefully we sort of foster a culture, and certainly within media, that we're less, we'll ask the young people to do it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm referred to as boomer all the time at work because I tried to do a call the other day with my AirPods and my AirPods weren't in and I was just talking to my phone out loud and I felt like such a silly, daft cow. But I think, and that was all done in jest, Good Loop is a very, very inclusive company to work at, I must say.
When they're not pointing and laughing.
But so hopefully we'll be more sort of aligned around attitudes and behaviours and experiences rather than age. Hopefully, that's what I hope.
Do you think in general we're too guilty in this industry of just looking at the shiny thing and thinking that that's the future because early adopters are quick onto it and we don't want to miss out? You're nodding profusely there.
Me?
Yeah,
I was nodding.
you.
We all were,
Yeah,
weren't we?
I was nodding as well, yeah. I think you're probably...
The answer is yes. I mean, we are obsessed with the shiny thing, and we do not see the future in the right way. We think that the future is something that we need. The knee-jerk reactions of brands to immediately diving on the NFT space, or all of a sudden deciding that they need a plot of virtual land, demonstrates that we see this in the wrong way. The future is something which, yes, it starts now, but it doesn't end now as well. You can build your expertise over time. In the Gartner hype cycle, which I'm sure you're all aware of, there's always this huge peak to start with of inflated expectations before Alton Towers log flumes down into that trough of, the trough of Come on, somebody.
Oblivion.
What?
Oblivion?
Not Oblivion, no, that's another Alton Towers ride. The Trough of Disappointment or Disillusionment, thank you. And nobody really seems to be able to bridge that gap or sort of get to that slope of enlightenment, as Gartner calls it, on a more even keel. When you prepare for the future, you should be thinking in 1, 2, 5 and 10 years and have structures within your company to be much more agile, to be able to take advantage of those in a sort of more relaxed and calm and structured and measurable and accountable and accessible way. What I see from brands are brands ringing me and saying, quick, I want to do a metaverse, what NFTs should I make, please? And that is very much the reaction I see, because they don't have the inbuilt ability, the brands don't, to be able to jump on, or not jump on trends, that's opposite what I'm saying, prepare for the future in the right way.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Let's move on. Rachel, what's your prediction?
So my prediction for 2030 is that we're going to be in an era of hyperconnectivity. And I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating and interesting time in that respect. And there's some really interesting research that was carried out by Frost & Sullivan recently. And they've predicted that by 2030, there will be 200 billion connected devices in the world. And just to put that into context, in 2020, there were 30 billion. So we're going to see a huge, huge growth very, very, very quickly. And this is all going to be possible through, I think, the convergence of kind of 5G and Wi-Fi 6, which is going to make connectivity a lot more easier, faster broadband speeds, better customer experiences, and also long-term cost efficiencies. And I'm hoping by 2030, things will be frictionless, everything will be purchasable, and I think products will become services. And this will open up a whole new opportunity for brands, and especially when we think about e-commerce, as we know of e-commerce today, I think that's going to be very different in 2030. And I think that it's going to be an incredible opportunity for brands to be thinking. They should be thinking right now about that, and we're starting to see already companies like TikTok, how they're evolving into that e-commerce space, and what that's going to mean. I think that's going to be incredible, question mark really there. But to my point there as well, I think the challenge with that is going to be, we're going to see a bit of a skill shortage happening here, because what you get with technology evolving as fast as it does is, and we've seen this before in our industry, is that how do we as humans keep up with that? Everything, yes, is going to be powered arguably by technology, by AI, by machine learning, but how can we ensure that humans keep up the skill set to be able to effectively manage and oversee this change happening?
And where do you see the growth specifically coming in connected devices? Because I imagine many people have smart speakers already, smart fridges maybe.
Yeah.
What devices or products do you think will become smarter, that will really be game-changing?
I think it will be across the home. I think there's going to be a convergence of kind of home and office now that we're seeing. I think we're going to have smart cities as well. So I think interestingly, one of the companies that we work with, we partner with Vida, which is owned by Hisense. They're doing a lot of work now, sort of similar to what Samsung are doing in terms of the connected home, actually, but looking at the TV being that centre platform, essentially, to connecting all other devices, and getting those devices to work seamlessly to feed data and insights into that TV platform. And that's a really interesting space for us, because I think for advertisers, it's not about how can we bombard people with ads across different screens around the house, but it's actually seamlessly integrating that experience to people, and enabling that frictionless environment for where people can engage with brands and make purchases and engage with content much more than they could ever before.
I think of driverless cars quite a lot as well, and just the challenge in terms of, we already have self-driving cars, but we don't have cities that are unable to accommodate self-driving cars. Imagine a self-driving car driving around Soho with all these higgledy-piggledy roads. I just can't ever see that happening. So I'm just fascinated to see how far that permeates, because it's a huge media owner opportunity where your car becomes a hotel room, perhaps.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
what do you think about that, Claire? Do you share that vision of the future?
I really hope it's not in 8 years' time. That would terrify me. I honestly don't think we have the money to retrofit cities to accommodate that level of progress.
What about the home? What about the home? Do you see your home being full of toasters talking to you?
No, I don't need my toaster to tell me that my toast is toasted. I don't need my fridge to tell me that I'm out of milk. Like, for me, I consented to having a Google Nest at home to monitor my dog. And then I just realised that all that did was make me more anxious about my dog being on her own, which is a whole other kettle of fish. But I think we're a country, we're already really over-surveyed, right, as a country, as a nation. And this feeds a lot into data privacy as well. It concerns me that we're prepared to invite even more surveillance into our homes in many ways. It leaves us vulnerable for exploitation. It produces a whole lot of unhuman behaviour as well. We're not like where do we make space for being human and experience like everything? Yeah, being really efficient is wonderful, but there are moments. There are supposed to be bumps in the road. Being a human, it's sort of so running out of milk. For example, a connected fridge doesn't feel like a major hurdle as an individual to overcome on a day-to-day basis. There are far bigger problems that we need to be worrying about, and certainly. Yeah, I don't want it. It might happen. I think it will stay quite small still. I don't know how. That said, I have just bought a smart bell. So
a ring. There you go. There you go. So
it was on a Prime special.
that's how they get you. So that was an interesting microcosm of the debate where I don't feel comfortable about being surveyed all the time, but this thing provides enormous value for me. And if I was an Amazon representative, I might argue, well, we just want to kind of streamline, make frictionless the shopping experience. What's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Phil, what do you think?
I think the way to think of it is the way that devices became electrified, certainly in the 50s and 60s. The phrase is that objects and household objects will be cognified as we move forward, which means they'll all have some kind of chip and they will be able to, as Rachel says, connect. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it. I mean, I read recently that you can fit an Alexa SDK, software development kit, into a microwave. I don't really understand because most people have these expensive microwaves, but all you do is ultimately, turn it to 2 minutes and press high, and then when it looks like it's boiling, then you open the door. That's what you do with a microwave. You don't really need that level. So I suppose my prediction is there may be that increasing cognification, but only where it adds real value to the consumer. So the doorbell is a great example. The Alexa-controlled microwave is not a good example. And also I would add that, just because what's the word I'm looking for? Just because certain technologies are widespread, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a shelf life. So I think there's some statistic about something like 99%, I might be wrong, of Alexa skills that are downloaded are used once and are never used again. And one of the things that I notice when I open my Google Assistant by accident or Alexa app by accident, it suggests or prompts things that you might want to say to it because you can't really think of the best way of using it. So overall, yes, more connection, yes, more cognification. I think that the Wi-Fi element is actually more pertinent. The smart home thing, I think, is overstated, and it might find specific use cases increase, but it won't be some blanket. It won't be some blanket application to every single item in your house or your home.
I think it's difficult to predict how culture can change. I mean, I remember many years ago when you mentioned Tinder before. I remember a time when online dating seemed creepy, and now it seems like 100% of single people online dating. So culture has just changed remarkably quickly, and I don't think people could have predicted that.
Thing of shame, didn't it? You were like going online to shop for a partner, basically.
But now it isn't, and I can see a similar thing to Rachel's point in terms of where a lot of the reservations we have about online surveillance, and that you, as Phil, you kind of question the need case for it. Well, you don't know what you need until you need it, I suppose, is the point I'm trying to make. But on the data privacy thing, I mean, if we care about that so much, I mean, haven't we? We've got consumers shoving their data over to online platforms for years now. Hasn't the horse bolted on that?
Yeah, I think it depends country to country, doesn't it? In the UK, we're really happy to shop online. We happily give our data over all day long. You go to Germany or Berlin, you pay for everything with cash. 40% of Germans...
Cash?
Yeah. Trying to pay for a coffee with a debit card in Berlin is impossible. But then you have this trust system where you're like, I'll be back in 5 minutes, I'm just going to go to the ATM. It's really nice, but also really inefficient and full of friction when it comes to just buying your oat flat white or whatever. But the other interesting thing is 40% of Germans have an ad blocker downloaded as some form of defence, right? Protection against their sort of data being used. And that's cultural. And I think we're in a really privileged position to talk about this in this industry and in this country. We're in a different place to the rest of the world. And certainly what I can sort of envisage is people really understanding the value of their data a lot more and using more and more tools becoming available for people to manage my data. And that's probably a phrase that we didn't use even 10 years ago. People understand that value exchange more and more now, even from the simple thing of like hitting accept cookies when you go onto a website. I find that annoying. I just want to find my cooking recipe. I don't mind being followed around afterwards with some baking ingredients ads. I just need to know how long this needs to be in the oven for example. So that value exchange exists, and I think people are becoming a lot more proficient in understanding that. And that's certainly the area that we work in at Goodloop. It's like understanding how my attention is worth something to this advertiser, but I'm getting rewarded for it. And so I think people are going to become a lot better at sort of controlling, gatekeeping their own data as well. So those tools will proliferate across the market, hopefully. But whether this is just unique to like the Western world and our experiences, because so much of our lives are lived online, versus developing countries and the global majority, whether it's something that becomes ubiquitous across the planet, I don't know. I think it will very much stay in our very sort of connected little microcosms that we have, where we're all on our screens all day, rather than working the land or something. So I think I think more and more people become a lot more fluent in understanding that transaction.
I think that's where, interestingly, where Web3 kind of comes on and comes into play really, which is, to your point about data, it's like the whole idea with Web3, which is, the evolution of the internet, and it's going to change the way that we see the internet today in terms of decentralizing and putting the user back in control. But certainly when it comes to data privacy, I think Web3 is seen as the solution to what is a ever-growing problem that has existed in the digital advertising industry for a long time. Because Web3 is built on blockchain technology, which essentially is much more transparent, safer way to kind of collect and store data. And I think that's going to potentially open up some opportunities for brands. It's going to be, I think, challenging for brands to potentially engage with people through Web3 as people start being a lot more selective. But essentially, if brands get it right, they could use that opportunity to build a relationship with consumers based much more on sort of trust and transparency than ever before. And I think if they get it right, it's a big opportunity there, and it could change the way that advertising is perceived and the results from that going forward.
I can't believe we've got to this point of the discussion already, and you're the first one to talk about blockchain. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, you all were talking about blockchain and how even contracts in our industry, in media, you were going to have smart contracts between advertisers and agencies, and we were going to have property conducted in that way. So it's interesting that we still talk about NFTs, but it seems to have become part. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Claire, what's your prediction?
Well, I wouldn't be head of investment and sustainable media without talking about the importance of sustainability. And I think there's been a huge acceleration over the past couple of years already. Certainly as we've emerged out of the fug post-pandemic, attention has rapidly pivoted over to the environment. I think there are going to be more jobs within this field, within the industry. My job has already changed. I was just working with agencies on regular video campaigns, and now, for one reason or another, I'm heading up a whole division of it. So sustainability is going to become a massive, it's no longer a buzzword, it's so important, with the industry committing to add net zero by 2030, with the tools now within the industry right now, proliferation of data, understanding what we're working with, we'll see a rapid acceleration over the next couple of years. And certainly from a consumer perspective, this is one of those issues that people, it doesn't matter what generation you're from. And in fact, Gen Zs are being incredible at influencing not just their parents, but their grandparents to buy more sustainably. And brands that do well in this space will benefit. People are 6 times more likely to protect brands that are doing good things for the planet. So I can see that changing massively, and I can see sort of certainly sustainability being at the core for media planning, but also in terms of activation and delivery, and it just hopefully becoming as ubiquitous as measuring viewability or brand suitability when it comes to delivering a campaign. That's my hope. And certainly at the moment, everyone's talking about it.
Surely a crucial first step of that is going to be having a common standard.
Yeah.
And how are we going to get that?
Yeah, it's difficult, right? Because there are so many different ways to activate a campaign. I think Scope 3 are doing some incredible work around exploring, getting under the skin of it, really investigating things. But they're generating a number of partnerships across the industry to try and make this regular and normal and not a sort of just a nice thing to have. We've got one good thing on our plan, and that it sort of permeates absolutely every element of a digital campaign, and hopefully other things, connected TV, digital out of home, audio. So that's my hope. But there is a lot of work to be done. That said, Scope 3 in just a short amount of time have generated a huge amount of focus around this problem, right? Brian O'Kelly has been incredible. He's everywhere. That's definitely what I see. There will be, right now, they're leading the charge. There will be more businesses that come in and make it less of a monopoly and more of an opportunity. And that's what we need. We can't be frightened of taking the first step, right? We might get things wrong, but anything is going to be better than maintaining the current status quo, which is quite a bit of inaction. So,
sure. Phil, you're nodding. Weren't you saying not so long ago that the older people are going to be around for longer, and Claire was just talking about how young people are going to change minds on this. I mean, how do you square that? Can both your predictions be right?
I think there's, I mean, as laudable a platform as Good Loop is, I think we have to be really conscious about the advertising messages that we layer on top of that in order to prosecute an environmental and sustainable messaging strategy. And the split in ages is really, really important that we take those into account. There is no one-size-fits-all strategy for advertising sustainability. And the reason why, I think, is because, yes, you will have your Gen Zs that will be on board, right? They will understand the importance, but please don't overestimate how on board the older generation are with this. And I'm not trying to patronise anybody here who's perhaps of more advancing years. They go, well, I recycle and all the rest of it. Yes, there is a discrepancy and there is a gap between intention and action, and some are still much more concerned with their daily lives, with the cost of living crisis, with war, with COVID. And I think when we assume that the more laudable the cause, the more likely that it will be adopted across the board, that is a huge mistake. If you look at something like Quorn, who are really nailing this, they have two strategies. On the one side, they have a manifesto film, which is full of oil slicks and cooling towers and wildfires, which they use online to advertise to sort of a Gen Z audience. But when they advertise to older generation, they don't mention sustainability whatsoever. They talk about the taste benefit, and they talk about how it could be a legitimate replacement for meat in, say, a meat and 2 veg or a pie, because what they are doing is they're majoring on the product's benefits rather than the ecological credentials, and they're doing that in a really clever way, because ultimately if the product has no discernible dip in quality or price, then you can sell to green skeptics and green people who are, I suppose, sustainability aware at the same time. It is a recognition of the split that we still have, that we perhaps don't talk about because in this room we're all on board with sustainability, but perhaps don't want to admit that there's a discrepancy between what people say and what people do. There are 1 in 15 Conservative MPs that still don't think climate change is real. 1 in 15 think it's a hoax, right? If you extrapolate that to the general population, I'm somebody that grew up in the shadow of a cooling tower, and all my families are coal miners, and they don't want to be thought of, that family, as green sinners, which is what effectively some sustainability advertising does. It surreptitiously points the finger, and you can't do that if you want to win people over. So platforms like Good Loop are fantastic to advertise to a particular cohort, but we must think of other means and other messaging priorities, including, and this is the last thing I should say on this, which is the overuse of standard green and sustainable tropes and cliches in our advertising. If I see one more advert with a bloody wind farm in it, do something different. Use some different technologies in there, not least because wind farms are, and we'll take this offline if anyone has any issues with it, deeply flawed technology, as are all energy technologies. But I don't think we're necessarily getting this right.
Okay. Rachel, what do you think? How does this square with your vision of the connected future, more sustainable? How do you see this panning out?
Well, I think it's interesting because I think actually the connected screen experience can actually do good in that way, and sort of educating people around how much electricity they're using, which some technology is doing already. But you can use connected screens to help educate people around how they can be more sustainable. Because I think there's a whole education thing around people. But again, I totally agree with you, Phil. It's about the way that sort of ramming it down people's throats all the time is not going to work. I think this is where we have to sort of educate people without sort of finger pointing all the time. And I think the cost of living is an interesting example of this. I think people are very focused now on where they can save money. And generally, being more sustainable, being more environmentally is perceived as being expensive. And it'll be interesting to see how brands can bring those two together during the next few years to actually ensure that people are still keeping environmental issues and sustainability front of mind, but it's not costing them from their own pocket, essentially, because often consumers see the cost going on to them rather than the big corporates, which is a big issue. So yeah,
that's the sort of, just the risk, the advertising industry has kind of created that, right? It's made us think that we're responsible for the climate crisis, and we're not as individuals, ultimately. We can recycle everything, or wish cycle as it usually is. We can reduce our food waste, which will make a huge impact, absolutely, and save us money. But ultimately, government inaction and big business inaction is what's stopping things from moving forward. So that's what we need. We need to vote better. We need to have better options to vote for. We need to really, really think about the kind of future that we want in 2030. We need to decide whether we're going to have private businesses controlling our data, or governments. Do you want Truss or Musk in charge of your data?
Should we have a vote on that then? We're just
says me in my Tory socks.
We are going to wrap up now, but does anyone have any burning questions for our panel of futurists before I'm going to allow one question at the back. Very keen person there. He's seen the future too.
God.
He doesn't agree with any of you, I can tell.
Please tell me it looks nice.
Please.
Thank you. Can I just compliment the panel on not giving us some Terminator-esque bleak vision of the future, or telling us the world's going to be overcome, and actually talking a hell of a lot of common sense, so thank you for that. Phil, I've been holding on to this question since you started talking about demographic disruption. Do you believe the media industry, which according to yesterday is facing a talent crisis, will be hit by an ageism lawsuit in the next 5 years? And if so, how many?
Do you want me to name a number, do you?
Yes, please.
Okay. 7. Does that answer your question? What was it Homer Simpson said? I don't make predictions and I never will. It's possible, because without getting too close to, I suppose, a dangerous legal controversial issue, there has been a sexism and an ageism and a gender and a race and a sex-based legal snafu already at an advertising agency in the last 18 months. I think some of you in this room may already know, where 2 guys, I think, that were feeling that they'd been discriminated by being older white guys. I think, I might be, don't quote me on that, and also don't sue me if that's not correct. I think I might be misinterpreting.
It's in the public domain for anyone.
Okay, all right. Okay, fine, good. So the number, in answer to the question, there has already been 1. Will we learn anything from that? It's possible that we won't learn anything from that, and there may be, if the issue becomes so prevalent within the consciousness of the industry that people of a certain age may wish to grab onto it and use it as a toolkit in order to prove their point. So the answer to your question is, I'm not going to predict how many, but if the issue becomes rises to the consciousness of the industry, there is a greater chance that there may be an ageism lawsuit within the agency. Inland, possibly.
I hope that answers your question somewhat. Thank you so much to the panel, and you can all go back to your offices and co-workers and say what the future is going to be like in 2030. So thank you very much. Thank you.